Welcome to episode 15 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Binns, and I'm very excited for this episode today because it's finally the return of the UFC in our lives. It's UFC Fight Night this week and the main event between Mackenzie Dern and Almeida. I've been waiting for this fight for a long time and I'm very excited to get into it. But just before the episode, I just want to say thank you for all the support on the interview with Bobby Winther. Go check that out right now, the episode before this, episode 14. Incredible conversation with Bobby the Ghost Winther, not only about his fight career, about weight cutting, about a lot of different things, about maybe revolutionizing MMA, starting academies that can pay for people to do MMA and kind of change the entire professional landscape of the sport. But thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight into this analysis. But before we get into the episode, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone on the views and the support on the most recent content, especially the short form clips. But 94% of you are not subscribed, man. What are we doing? Subscribe, join the family. And I'm just happy to grow this community and grow MMA media more healthily than ever before. Thank you so much for watching. Let's get straight back to the episode. So I haven't predicted fights for a while, but I did put a lot of work and a lot of research for this episode today. So let's get straight into the main event. Mackenzie Dern versus Almeida. This is the second time these two ladies are meeting, and it's going to be a cracker of a fight. And that's because there's a lot of narratives going into this one. Obviously, the last time we saw Mackenzie Dern, she got a good win against Lupi Godinez. She's trained down in Mexico, Lupi. And we've seen a kind of return to a little bit of better striking in terms of Mackenzie Dern because she's back with Jason Parillo now. And I want to talk a little bit about that last fight because I think Jason Parillo's influence has been noticed by people like me, especially in terms of the striking, obviously. Mackenzie Dern being more confident in that aspect. But more than anything, the in-between the rounds advice. But let me get into that fight a little bit. So what I noticed instantly, it was a much better performance than maybe some of her previous performances because she had better rhythm. This is Mackenzie Dern I'm talking about. A lot better rhythm on the feet. She was popping that jab and she had a really nice 1-2. Now, Mackenzie Dern offensively, when she's going forward and she throws that jab to the cross straight away, it's really nice and clean, very straight, not looping punches, and kind of looks like a more polished striker than we've seen her in recent times. And also, I just thought she was back to, her best in terms of her ability to get the fight to the ground. A couple of judo throws that I thought were very, very good, especially in that first round. And she went for an armbar in that first round as well, I believe. So we did see the grappling aspect, obviously. Mackenzie Dern with the jiu-jitsu base, multiple-time jiu-jitsu champion, at multiple weight classes. So she's a killer on the ground. She's just had trouble in her recent fights of maybe, developing into that striker. And she went away from Jason Parillo, who used to train, he still trains Chito Vera, who's trained Michael Bisping, Luke Rockhold, people like this. And I think what's changed about Mackenzie Dern when she's been with Jason Parillo is that aggressive striking, that ability to put the pressure on and kind of recognize her own weakness in a sense. Because it is a fact that Mackenzie Dern, when she exits exchanges after combos, she kind of puts her arms out straight and leaves her chin up high in the air, which is a recipe for disaster when it comes to, exiting an exchange in terms of safety, in terms of getting knocked out, in terms of taking damage. So, the best strategy for her, as Parillo would have told you in between those rounds was, keep focus, keep the pressure on. And I think he actually did say that. I think I wrote it down, which was, pressure, keep going forward, throw the 1-2 and add the uppercut afterwards. Because what would happen is Mackenzie Dern in that Godinez fight would throw the 1-2 and then look to instantly exchange. And that's when Godinez, who was shelling up very well, kept, two gloves straight onto the eyebrows, onto the forehead, was able to counter and actually put some damage on Mackenzie. Parillo said, her head coach, throw that 1-2, throw the lead uppercut, and, stay in the pocket, stay forward because her weakness is being pushed back, fighting on the back foot. And obviously you saw in that round 3, if you've watched that fight, Mackenzie Dern not empty the tank, but, implement those uppercuts that Jason Parillo, her coach, was asking for. This is a fighter who, I watched a couple of her fights on UFC Fight Pass and, she's had a very, very interesting journey. This is a fighter who has been in a lot of battles. Mackenzie Dern, she's very, very experienced now. And it changes a lot in terms of coming into this second fight with Almeida, this rematch. I think Mackenzie Dern was 7-0 in MMA in 2019, I believe it was, when they first fought. And she's made a lot of developments in the game, especially being back with Parillo. I know I've mentioned that a lot, but I think it's going to be vital in terms of a stark difference between the first and second fight. But before I make my prediction, let me talk about Amanda Ribas a little bit. If we look at that first fight with Mackenzie Dern, Amanda Ribas just looked levels above in terms of the striking. Mackenzie was just a lot less precise, a lot less fluid on the feet back then, a lot more hectic and uncomfortable in the exchanges, less aggressive. And I just thought in that fight, Ribas looked so much more comfortable on the feet, lots of feints, lots of good pressure, very twitchy hips. That's the thing I've noticed about Amanda Ribas. And if you look at her performance against Rose Namajunas most recently, although she came off a loss in that fight, her hips are constantly twitching. You don't know whether you're going to get kicked, whether she's feinting to go up top with the hands, and obviously has her ability on the ground as well. But yeah, I think even in that fight, Amanda Ribas did show the levels, but that was 5 years ago. Has Mackenzie Dern improved enough to close the gap on the feet and be a bit perhaps more dangerous on the feet? Or, be able to keep up in that aspect and actually knock Amanda Ribas out? I would say that would be a possibility, but if you watch that Luana Pinheiro fight from Amanda Ribas, she's an absolute dog. She doesn't go out easily. Luana Pinheiro comes out swinging for the fences in that first round and, lands some big shots. Even though they're looping, they were landing. Ribas's face was all swollen up from those hits. But what did she do? She weathered the storm, was tough, and was able to actually, absorb that damage, wait for Luana Pinheiro to get tired, and eventually knocked her out with a high kick, spinning high kick, which, unbelievable knockout from Amanda Ribas. So she does have that finishing ability herself on the feet, which is quite dangerous because she's also made big steps coming into this Mackenzie Dern fight. But if you had to ask me who I think is going to win this, it's really difficult. Amanda Ribas is coming off a loss, but that loss was upper weight class. And we've seen Amanda Ribas go between flyweight and strawweight. But I think for a lot of, the lighter weights, if you're able to make the lighter weight, it's better for you because you're going to have more of a speed advantage. You're going to be able to, be the bigger person in the cage most often. But it does call into question that issue of weight cutting. Is the extra pounds worth it? It seems Amanda Ribas is very comfortable fighting at the higher weight and flyweight. But at 150 pounds, I do believe she has a speed advantage on a lot of people and is more dangerous. I don't know. Usually the UFC doesn't like people bouncing between weight classes, but even in that Rose Namajunas fight, where also Rose moved up her weight, let's not forget that. I think Amanda Ribas is very underrated in terms of the striking, and is going to come into this thinking, what I did to Mackenzie Dern, I can do it again. But if I'm Jason Perillo, if I'm Mackenzie Dern, I believe I can win this rematch by doing two things. I stay more aggressive. I keep the pressure forward. Hopefully she's still working on the ability to exit exchanges safely, keep her chin down, fight in the clinch. But her best attributes on the feet, her best probability of winning exchanges and big parts of this fight on the feet is if she can keep that pressure forward. She can throw the 1-2, throw the third shot, whether that's the lead uppercut, whether that's a lead hook. Just make sure you throw that third shot and keep Ribas on the back foot. If you can tie Ribas up, if you can land some big shots, then you're going to have your openings to get the takedown. And obviously, Mackenzie Dern on the ground is a problem for anybody in that division. Mackenzie Dern is obviously a very talented fighter, and I think she's probably being counted out a little bit in terms of her striking because we have seen her get pieced up. And Amanda Ribas, she's underrated as well. I think a lot of people are not expecting big fireworks from this main event, but I am. Amanda Ribas can spinning wheel kick knock you out like she did to Luana Pinheiro. She is tough. She's never really going to get... I know she got finished a couple times, but I don't see Mackenzie Dern finishing her. And she's just got incredible ability, incredible IQ and feints. And obviously very well-rounded and big for the weight class. But if you had to ask me... it's a very difficult one for me. I'm going to go with Mackenzie Dern. And I think, I don't know the odds. Actually, I probably should have looked. How unprepared am I? But I probably think Mackenzie Dern is an underdog coming into this fight because she has lost before. But you never know. Mackenzie Dern carries a lot of name value. But I'm going to go with Mackenzie Dern. I think she's improved immensely. Back with Perillo after a stint away from that camp. And I think, for a lot of fans, this is going to be an underrated fight. A lot of fans probably not expecting that much here. But I am. And yeah, very excited for that fight, if I'm honest with you. But let me move now to the co-main event of the evening. This is a fight between Colston Harris and Ponzinibbio. Ponzinibbio, I mean, how many fights has this guy had? Over 30 fights, lots of experience. I'm one of a guy who's been in there with the best of them. He's been in there with Jeff Neal. He's been in there with Neil Magny, has a win over Neil Magny, I believe. I'm probably missing out a couple of names, if I'm honest with you. But he's been in there with the best of the best. And I wrote that down because that's going to have a big impact on this fight. Ponzinibbio, let me start off with Carlston Harris, actually. Let me not get too ahead of myself because I did want to start talking about Ponzinibbio. But let's talk about Carlston Harris. This is a guy who I think is 4-2 in the UFC. I could be mistaken. And he's on the older side. He's from Guyana and Brazil. Guyana, fun fact, only country in Latin America to speak English. Don't know if you know that. I'm not just a MMA journalist or analyst or whatever I am. I'm also a genius. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I mean, Impa KO. So he knocked out Impa Kasanganay with an incredibly hard knockout. I mean, in the exchange, was able to win that fight. And then if we look at, he was in there with Carlston Harris, was in there with Shavkat Rakhmonov as well. So he's been in there with some really, really talented guys, especially Impa. He's probably very underrated. He's in the PFL right now. I spoke to Tuko Tokos on episode 12 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast in an interview. UFC fighter himself. He trains with Impa Kasanganay at Killcliff, and he told me he's an absolute killer. So I can imagine, getting a knockout win over him was incredible. And his reaction in the post-fight, interaction between those two was very wholesome. He said, to Impa, keep your head up. You still got time. You're young. And it was very wholesome. So although he just brutally knocked him out, he had some kind words for him, to be fair. And even in that Shavkat Rakhmonov fight, Carlston Harris showed immense ability to get out from positions, although he ended up getting spinning wheel kick knocked out by Shavkat. He did show the ability to get up from tough positions, and we know the grappler and the pressure that people like Shavkat Rakhmonov can apply, especially when they're on top on the ground. Yeah, and if we also look at that fight he had against Chaos Williams, most recently, I believe, in last year, May, so must have been May 2024, if I'm not mistaken. He's doing very well in that fight. They're exchanging. I remember that. He throws a 1-2, clean 1-2 that lands on Williams. He's going in for the kill. And then obviously Williams, in the middle of that exchange, catches Harris, puts him out cold, throws one or two more shots on the ground, and it's all said and done. So he hasn't fought since a brutal knockout, but this is a guy who's got resilience. I remember that fight against Jeremiah Wells. Jeremiah Wells, 5'9", a bit shorter than him. Carlston Harris is 6 foot, I believe. But Jeremiah Wells absolutely dominated, I would say, 2.5 out of those 3 rounds, putting the pressure on Carlston Harris, taking him down, putting him against the cage, just grinding on him, wearing him out. And in that first round, he almost gets Carlston Harris in a Darce choke, I believe. And somehow, even though it looks locked up, Carlston Harris is able to survive that, loses the second round. Everybody thinks it's probably over. And then out of nowhere, he lands, I think, an anaconda choke, which is an absolutely insane comeback if you watch that fight. I recommend people who can go watch that fight between Jeremiah Wells and Carlston Harris. It will make you a lot more excited for this fight than you probably are. And, I think he lost the entire fight up until the point he landed an anaconda up against the cage and pushed Jeremiah Wells out to sleep. If you actually watch that fight with the broadcast volume on, you hear Michael Bisping, I think it's Paul Felder at the time, saying, oh no, he doesn't have the choke. It's not secured. And then you just see Jeremiah Wells absolutely unconscious and Carlston Harris able to get up, to win that fight with his hands in the air and establish himself in the UFC. So I believe he's 4-2, but somebody can fact check me on that as well. But I analyzed their 4 fights. So I analyzed a fight against Impa Kasanganay where he won by knockout. I analyzed a submission win, which was a huge comeback victory. And then obviously against Shavkat, he got knocked out. And against Chaos Williams, he also got knocked out. So it depends how you look at it. This is a really, really experienced, tough fighter. And although he's got good IQ for the game on the feet, he does have quite sloppy right hand. So when you see him throw the 1-2, the 2 kind of loops around and kind of slaps people behind the ear. And it's effective, to be fair to him, but it's not the most cleanest 1-2 you'll ever see in your life. But that's, the first part of this fight. And I know I spent a lot of time with Carlston Harris, but Ponzinibbio, now this is the guy that, he's been in there, as I said, with the best of them. He's on a 2-fight loss streak, unfortunately, but those 2 losses are against Muslim Salikov and Kevin Holland. Now, Muslim Salikov, I counted him out like an absolute idiot against Song Kenan at UFC Macau. And in that fight, he just showed me he's an absolute striking tactician. He doesn't look like the most athletic guy at 40 years old, but, you know, he wheel kicks everyone. I think he's got 3 wheel kick knockouts in the UFC. He's called the King of Kung Fu or the Master of Kung Fu. And so losing to Muslim Salikhov in that fight is not that much of a shame. And especially if you go watch that loss to Salikhov, Ponzinibbio had a lot of success in that fight, keeping the pressure on Muslim Salikhov, not staying in boxing range or completely out, not trying to mess around with that kicking range, maybe add to that list of Muslim Salikhov wheel kick, head kick KOs. But I really thought he was very good with the pressure against the fence, with the high volume of strikes that he was throwing. It just ended up that I think he ran out a little bit of gas at the end, and the judges, I think, gave a split decision or a 29-28 decision over to Muslim Salikhov. I know Ponzinibbio was disappointed with that result, and if you ask me, probably I would have given it to Ponzinibbio, but I probably have to go watch that fight again. I watched it a couple of times, but it was a close one. But it depends what you prioritize in a fight, right? Do you prioritize damage? Do you prioritize pressure? I know the scorecards say pressure, and we'll get. I know the scorecards say damage, but oftentimes the judges don't actually score like that. They score more in control, and that's probably for a bigger debate another day. But, you know, he's got incredible leg kicks, incredible IQ for the game and experience, and he's a tough MF. But obviously, he's coming off that second loss in that 2-loss streak against Kevin Holland, where he got pretty much put to sleep, although he was able to stand up and started complaining straight away. Kevin Holland catches him with a left-handed, as I believe, and kind of knocks him down and puts him out. But Kevin Holland, on his day, can beat anyone. I think he's an elite fighter, quite underrated in his own right. But Ponzinibbio, this is a guy who I really wouldn't count out in the long term. If I think back to one of his best performances, I think about his knockout of Morono. And, you know, that was kind of a slugfest in itself. I think it was a 3rd-round knockout, if I'm not mistaken. And Ponzinibbio is able to catch Morono when he's kind of on his toes, his feet are together, and he's off the floor. Now, one of my Muay Thai coaches always says, you know, you got to stick to the floor. You have no power if your feet are not on the floor, if you're skipping around, and you're not able to take a shot if you're not stuck to the mat, stuck to the ground, right? And if you look at Morono's movement in that fight, Ponzinibbio is able to start timing when Morono kind of exits an exchange or exits distance or exits that range. His feet are up in the air. He's tipping, tapping about, and, you know, you can't take a big shot from a guy like Ponzinibbio if your feet are not rooted to the floor. And, you know, a lot of defensive work and having a chin is actually about footwork and keeping attached to the canvas. But if you look at that fight, I mean, that's the Ponzinibbio that you can get at any moment with his experience. He's an older guy. I think he's about 38 or 39 years old now, Ponzinibbio. So you never know. You never know what you're going to see from that age. It's probably less about, you know, being the best in the gym every day and kind of being the best on the night. Jim Miller kind of speaks about that, one of the oldest fighters in the UFC, record maker, Jim Miller. But if you ask me, who do I think is going to win this fight? It's really hard again. I'm kind of torn. To be honest with you, I could choose either. So don't place your bets based on what I'm saying. I'm gonna go Carlson Harris. But Ponzinibbio could definitely get it done. I see a brute for both these guys to win. They've both got power. They've both got experience, but they're both coming off knockouts, I believe. So you never know how that affects a fighter going forward, not only in their physical ability to take a shot, but also the mentality. Are you going to be a bit more gun shy? Are you going to be a bit more worried about taking a shot? And I worry more about that for Carlson Harris than I would do Ponzinibbio, because Ponzinibbio has been in this game a long time and come through adversity. But let's get excited for that fight, because I think that's one of those fights where it's going to be fireworks either way, even though it doesn't have the biggest name value you've ever heard of. So the next fight I need to get into is Cesar Almeida versus Abdul Razak Alhassan. I'm so excited for this fight, mainly because of Cesar Almeida. If you want a clinic on MMA striking, or you just like to watch pure striking, or not pure striking, but clean striking, precise striking in MMA, this is one of the guys you have to watch. I believe he's 6-1 in professional mixed martial arts. His only loss coming to Kopylov, who's also fighting on this card against Chris Curtis. I want to talk about that Kopylov fight in a second. But let me first talk about his most recent fight that I've seen, which was against Potieria. In that fight, he showed an immense ability to switch stances, clean, roll with the shots, throw the leg kick. And to be honest with you, he just looks so calm and so composed in those standing exchanges. You know, it reminds me a lot of someone like Peter Yan, for example, just so composed. and ability to see shots coming. But in that fight, you have to admit it was refereed very weirdly, which is a bigger topic for another day. I mean, the referee allowed 3 eye pokes from Cesar Almeida towards his opponent. I think a cup hit as well. And every time they got into a clinch situation on the fence, the referee would jump in within the first 2 seconds. So having said all that, it was still an amazing performance by Cesar Almeida, although he probably should have had a point deducted from him, to be honest with you. But in that fight, I mean, the leg kicks were there, the ability to switch stances, to roll with the shots and throw a shot straight away. If you look at that Budka KO that he landed earlier in his UFC career, body shots towards a body shot KO towards the ground and pound, I believe. And then let's talk about this Kopylov fight. I mean, Kopylov's on this fight card. He's a very, very good fighter, Kopylov. But I think about the massive shots that Kopylov was able to land. 1-2 in the southpaw position. And in that fight, you know, it really was a battle of attrition in the sense that both of these guys were elite strikers. And what you saw was Kopylov for the first time in his career, probably, which we'll talk about, was kind of focused more on the grappling. He knew Cesar Almeida was a great striker and it was going to be a competitive fight on the feet. So what he had to do, go to the ground, try and win the fight on the ground. What that did, basically, in my opinion, was tire Kopylov out. And Cesar Almeida had a lot of success in all 3 of those rounds. If you had asked me at the time what I would have scored it, I would have scored it 29-28 in favor of Cesar Almeida. I think the judges probably gave the fight to Kopylov because of the amount of control time. I think in each round, he probably had 2 to 3 minutes of control time. But based on pure damage, success in striking, more powerful shots landed, I would have given that to Cesar Almeida. But there is something that I do want to talk about in that fight, which shows the elite striking that this guy has, not only offensively, but defensively, and his ability to throw counter punches. You know, I'm going to put the screenshots here, and I don't usually do this, but just look through these screenshots here. So they're in the exchange. Kopylov throws the straight shot. Almeida sees it coming, lets it kind of hit him, but he rolls with the punch fully. And as he's rolling with the punch to his right, he throws the right hand straight down the pipe back at Kopylov. And that's something that I've seen not from somebody else that's really good at striking. That's Alex Pereira. They share the same coach in Glover Teixeira. And it's probably a philosophy that they carry on throughout their entire camp and all their fighters. They kind of roll with the shot and throw with the same hand that they rolled it from. And that's, you know, a basic principle of blocking and counter punching. But the way he did it, he didn't necessarily, you know, pull his elbow up to his head or, you know, put his elbow out forward and block the shot coming in. He literally rolls his head to the side, kind of takes all the sting out the punch and just throws a beast of a right hand back at Kopylov and lands. You know, those are the type of things that I think are the minute details in striking that separate you from a good striker and a great striker. And I do believe that Cesar Almeida is a great striker, and that's going to be a very dangerous prospect for Abdul Razak Alhassan coming into this fight. But let's talk about Alhassan for a second. You know, his most recent fight, I believe, was a no contest or a draw against Cody Brundage. And to be fair, it was the Cody Brundage stoppage was not, if I'm Alhassan, I would have been absolutely devastated. And by the judgment of his reaction, his face as they were reading out the result, I think he was absolutely devastated because he rocks Cody Brundage. He's winning that fight. He's ground and pounding him, and maybe 1 or 2 shots hit the back of Cody Brundage's head. And what does Cody Brundage say? He says, "I can't continue." And unfortunately, I know you shouldn't be able to be rewarded for winning a fight if you hit someone in the back of the head, but we do see that happen a lot. Michael Chandler against Charles Oliveira recently, you know? So for the victory to kind of be taken away from Alhassan in that sense, for Cody Brundage to say he couldn't continue, it's a very, very unfortunate thing to happen, but it did happen, unfortunately. And, you know, this is a guy who's been in there with some killers, man. Abdul Razak Alhassan. Before that, you know, unfortunate result against Cody Brundage, was in there with Joe Pyfer. I mean, Jesus, Joe Pyfer in that fight was on, man. His ability to go from the striking to the heavy body kicks literally sounded like gunshots. We know the power Joe Pyfer has at middleweight to mix in the takedowns and eventually get the submission, put Abdul Razak Alhassan out cold and put him to sleep. But this is a guy, if you look at that Claudio Ribeiro fight, he can knock you out as well. I mean, he's got great elbows in the clinch. He is able to land flurries of punches on you on the exit. And then obviously in that fight, brutal KO that puts Claudio Ribeiro to sleep. So this is a guy who's extremely athletic, has a lot of power, is tough in that Joe Pyfer fight. I mean, the shots he was getting hit with in terms of the body kicks, it was gruesome, to be honest with you. But he just kept coming, didn't phase him. And, only looked in trouble when he was actually out after the submission. So this is a guy who's going to offer a very competitive fight to Cesar Almeida. But I just trust in the striking excellence that Cesar Almeida presents. That camp that they have over there in Colorado, under Glover Teixeira, obviously working with people like Alex Pereira. I'm sure, they're those guys who just have a very, very good mind for the striking side of things. And sometimes you feel like you're having success. I'm sure, between those two guys, Kopylov and Cesar Almeida, there's a lot of respect because Kopylov probably thought sometimes, I got him. I just stuck him with one. And Cesar Almeida comes right back with some lovely counter punches. And, this is a very interesting fight to me, but I do believe that Cesar Almeida is going to get back in the win column here. Add a 2 streak to his win record. And, this is a guy who I think is going to be back there arguing with the best of them in this division. So I'm going to take Cesar Almeida by decision, but it could be a KO. You never, ever know. But let's move now onto a very interesting fight. We've got the return of Chris, the Action Man Curtis versus Kopylov. Now, we just spoke about Kopylov a lot with Cesar Almeida, but I'm going to start with Chris Curtis here. Chris Curtis is one of those fighters that is just an absolute fighter's fighter. Very heavy boxing style, beautiful body shots, very tough, can take a lot of damage and keep coming. And, it's not going to necessarily knock you out in one punch. It's going to beat you up and make it a long night for you in there. He comes out of that Extreme Couture camp with Sean Strickland, that kind of just pressure type fighting, that just endless barrage of punches. And he's just a tough MF, a real fighter. And to be honest with you, the fight I watched in preparation for this was his most recent one, where unfortunately at the very end of it, he tore his hamstring. That's why we haven't seen him for so long. But it was the rematch with Brendan Allen. And I had forgotten who won that fight. So as I'm watching it, I'm thinking about, who's winning the fight? And, I just thought that Chris Curtis had a lot of success in that fight with the pressure, with keeping the fight in his area, in his playground in terms of the boxing. Beautiful body shots. I mean, the way he's able to dig those uppercuts, it's probably some of the best in the UFC in terms of those punches, because I don't see a lot of people able to, in the middle of those exchanges, have the IQ, positioning, speed, technique to dig those uppercuts into the ribs of their opponents. And, I thought he just had immense pressure in that fight. And I remember Henry Hoof in between, I would say round 2 and 3 and maybe 4 and 5, saying to Brendan Allen, Tuco Tokos, who we had on the show, was also in that corner, coaching or cornering Brendan Allen. So shout out to Tuco. But I remember Henry Hoof, head coach at Killcliff, saying to Brendan Allen, why are we boxing with this guy? We're Brendan Allen, obviously elite all-round martial artist, mixed martial artist, but he was like, we don't need to be boxing with this guy. But Chris Curtis does have a great ability to drag guys in to that boxing game. And there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, he's a great boxer in terms of MMA. He's got great body shots. He can slow you down so you can't really do much else. But number 3, he's got incredible ability to survive on the feet. He's very hard to submit. Brendan Allen got him in a couple body triangles, and he has, I don't know if it's his, anatomy, but his rib cage is able to twist it, get out of the body triangle, always uses his kind of right arm as leverage, puts it straight out, creates separation between him and his opponent who's keeping him on the ground, and is able to get right back up. And he did that a couple of times, which I think probably demoralized Brendan Allen a couple of times and definitely tired him out. But, I just thought this was an incredible fight, and it showed the toughness of Chris Curtis. And if I'm honest with you, I thought he did win that fight 3-2. By the end of the fight, he, for me, dominated most of that 5th round. And obviously at the end, he tears his hamstring and Brendan Allen lands a flurry at the end, which maybe changed the judge's mind in terms of the biggest shots. But unfortunately, for Chris Curtis, he didn't get a win and he tore his hamstring. So, when you're talking about Chris Curtis, though, you are talking about a guy who's got the ability to be anybody in this game. Imavov. Is that his name? Nasruddin Imavov. In that fight, again, he was also having success with the body shots. I mean, incredible technique on those body shots, tight striking, And then another unfortunate thing happens to him. He gets the headbutt into the eye. And, for a guy like Chris Curtis, one of the toughest fighters out there, trains through rib injuries. If we've seen him sparring with Ian Gary, that video, he literally tears the cartilage in his ribs. Ian Gary's like, no, we don't need to train. Chris Curtis is like, shut the fuck up, let's go. Yeah. So he gets headbutted in the eyebrow, can't see anything, begging for more time from the doctor and the referee. But unfortunately, he says, I can't see. And the referee, Jason Herzog, decides to end the fight. But if, we look at Kopylov here, we spoke about him with Almeida. I mean, in that Almeida fight, don't get me wrong, he was also very, very good on the feet, and he is very, very good on the feet. He's a technician when it comes to the striking. And he suffered that submission loss he suffered that submission loss to Anthony Hernandez. But, he still got that elite striking, worked on that grappling, tried to implement it a bit against Cesar Almeida. It worked. He got him down, but it tired him out. Do we see that again against Chris Curtis? Do we see him mixing the takedowns? I think it's probably a good idea to make sure it's a threat to Chris Curtis, like he kind of did to Cesar Almeida, but hopefully he's increased his gas tank, because Chris Curtis is not a guy that gets tired. Not really. I mean, he was exhausted in the end of that Brendan Allen fight, but that was a 5-round war, right? And this is a 3-round fight on the main card. I'm sure Chris Curtis is more motivated than ever. And I don't know if Kopylov will be able to tire Chris Curtis out. So maybe the grappling might not even be worth it. Maybe try and win those stand-up exchanges. But even him, I mean, who did he get? He got Claudio Ribeiro also with a head kick. Head kick knockout. Absolutely insane. And was it a head kick? I think it was a head kick. And then he got Josh Fremd, with a body knockout as well, like body shots. So this guy's an elite striker, elite finisher. And I think he's only lost 2 times. One of those being to Anthony Hernandez by submission. So if I'm one of these two, let me speak. If I'm Chris Curtis, if I'm Action Man coming into this fight, I know I'm not going to be as technical as Kopylov. And I think I saw Chris Curtis fight against Jack Hermansson at UFC Fight Night in London one year. Maybe it was 2022, something like that. And unfortunately, in that fight, Jack Hermansson was too smart. He just circled the octagon. Chris Curtis couldn't cut the cage off, couldn't close the distance. And although it turned out to be a boring fight for all of us in the arena, the fans, because there wasn't that much action and wasn't that much to score, Chris Curtis comes out with the loss. Kopylov might be looking at something like that fight saying, you know what? I don't need to engage in any brawls, because that's where Chris Curtis is going to be his best. That's where he's going to be able to land the body shots. So for Kopylov, I keep the distance long. I'm mixing the grappling to keep it as a threat. And I try not to get in any brawls. For Chris Curtis, I put the pressure on. I try and cut off the cage and force a dirty fight and force those boxing close range exchanges where I can land my body shots. Because Kopylov doesn't have the best cardio that we've ever seen in terms of that Cesar Almeida fight. So if he can land those body shots, land those digging uppercuts, I'm sure he'll be able to slow Kopylov down and bring the fight closer in terms of the technical ability on the feet. So for me, that's the fight that needs to happen for Chris Curtis in order for him to win. But I'm going to go for a Kopylov. I don't know. I might go for Chris Curtis win on that. Oh, it's a very hard one for me. I'm going to abstain. You guys let me know in the comments. That could go either way for me, because I think people underrate the ability of Chris Curtis, and especially with some time off, although he's been rehabbing torn hamstring, it could be a different Chris Curtis that we're going to see. So let's talk about that second fight on the main card, Christian Rodriguez versus Austin Bashi. I'm going to start with C-Rod, because I think he deserves it as kind of the veteran in the UFC here. He's an incredibly good, gifted fighter. I remember watching him for the first time, I believe, closely, when he fought Raul Rosas Jr., when Raul Rosas was the biggest thing in MMA coming up, one of the youngest fighters in the UFC, probably still is, and came up against C-Rod. Raul Rosas comes out booming, trying to kill C-Rod, and he's able to survive that early onslaught and end up getting the win. But if I look at that fight that he had with Weems, I believe it's against Weems, where he shows his ability on the feet, the switch kick, high kick, that lands. And, in that fight, I think he lands an anaconda, which is a really nice submission that we saw somebody like Carlson Harris, who I mentioned earlier, landed one of those as well recently. The anaconda choke is a very interesting one. It's very cool to watch, especially on TV, very visually pleasing. And and he landed that on Joshua Weems. Is that his name, Joshua Weems? I don't know. I don't want to mess that up, but, Weems. Last name Weems. That's what you need to know. And, this is a very, very talented fighter all around, especially on the ground, has some submissions to his name. But he's fighting a Dana White Contender Series alum who's very interesting. 13-0, Austin Bashi. If you watch his Dana White Contender Series fight against Ramos, he looks like an absolute problem. I looked through his amateur record a little bit. Lots of finishes, ground and pound, lots of submissions. And in that Ramos fight in the Dana White Contender Series, the amount of pressure, the relentless chain wrestling he's able to apply and eventually just stay on the back, just literally float on the back of Ramos. He's not able to get him off. If he did, he was landing big shots. At one point, it literally looks like they both stand up out of an exchange. Ramos kind of tries to create that distance between the two. Bashi just says no, legit, throws him to the ground, throws him across the cage. He has incredible power athletically. If you look at him, he looks jacked. He looks very, very, very strong in those exchanges. And eventually he's able to get the back, stay on it, float with the transitions and land the rear naked choke and get the win and impress Dana White. If you look at Dana White and Sean Shelby after that fight, they were looking at each other like, we have to sign this kid. It was a very, very impressive performance. And now I believe it's his debut in the UFC against a very solid guy like Christian Rodriguez. Except they put Christian Rodriguez to ruin the hype trains of all these young guys. And let's see if he can do it again like he did with Raul Rosas Jr. But for me, this is a very close fight to call. C-Rod is just such a veteran, so tough. But he's got great composure. I do kind of see Austin Bashi coming out and trying to put that pressure on C-Rod. And for all I know, could definitely go and get the win and could get the victory. But the bright light of the UFC, even though it's in the apex, it might get to someone like Austin Bashi. But for me, I might have to go with Austin Bashi. Is he an underdog? I don't know. I might have to go with Austin Bashi on that fight. And because I just saw something very special in that fight. The ability to move somebody like that, the power he had, the fearlessness, the relentlessness, the I don't give a fuck attitude that Austin Bashi showed. It's something very special. I think it blew Dana White away as well. So this is a huge test for someone like Bashi. C-Rod, can he put the hype train down again? But for me, I'm going to go with Bashi. I know it's a wild take probably for a lot of people, but I just see something special. And if C-Rod gets it done again, I'll eat my words and I'm happy to, because as I said, this podcast and these prediction episodes analysis, not necessarily about it getting it all right. I don't need to get it all right. I'm happy for fighters either way, even when they win, even though I got it wrong. This is not a I told you so type thing, and we're not keeping score. So if anybody is actually keeping score, let me know. What's my percentage? What's my success rate in terms of these predictions? But yeah. Anything else to say about that? I don't think so. I think, C-Rod showed a lot more than people thought he had against Rosas. And in that fight, I don't remember if it was the Weems fight, but in preparation for this, I did see, his pressure. He's got that aggressiveness, that composure, and showing that addition in his arsenal in terms of the striking, those switch kicks, the ability to mix it up is what makes him so dangerous. And obviously on the ground, he's a killer. So I wouldn't be surprised necessarily if Bashi is going for stuff and if we see grappling exchanges and we see C-Rod latch onto a submission and able to get the win. I do think a lot of these fights are very closely and well matched up by the UFC, although they're probably not the biggest stars ever. But, you wouldn't necessarily want the biggest stars ever on the UFC Apex cards, right? Because you want a big crowd, you want the pop, you want the hype. And eventually I think the UFC should probably move away from these Apex cards, but that's probably a discussion for another day. Because, I don't know. Is it? Well, let me just say something about that. I think it's a shame that some of these fighters don't get, when they finally reach the UFC, they don't get that pop, they don't get that exposure that they deserve. Because half of it, right, is the performing in front of the live fans. That's what makes the UFC great. That's what Dana White has said is, we have great production, our great broadcasting, great commentating teams, great fighters, but it's those live arenas, that energy that the UFC fight nights build, the UFC pay-per-views build when they're in front of people. That's what's important. So hopefully they can kind of get out of the Apex this year as much as possible and get back and fighting in front of tons of people and thousands. And, they did a bunch of fight nights like that. They obviously did Macau, they did Tampa. I'm sure there's a bunch, that they did last year, but they just need to do more of those. Oh, they did one in Canada with Moreno and Albazi. So there's a bunch of options for them. To do fight nights in front of people. So let me get into the last fight that I'm going to predict and analyze. There's some big fights on the undercard that I wish I could get to. But to open up this main card is Punahele Soriano versus Medic. And this is kind of a tough fight to predict, but I've come to a decision here. Let's start with Punahele. This is a guy who's been in there with some beasts in the middleweight division. Been in there with Kopylov. It seems like everybody's fought Kopylov on this card. Been in there with Brendan Allen. He's an all-American wrestler, 185 pounds, of course. He's a southpaw. So he does present problems for a lot of people. You know, this is not a bad fighter. And although he lost those two elite guys that I mentioned, he also has incredible knockouts. I think about that knockout against, how do you say his name? Lugiambala? Something like that. Sorry for butchering the name. But he landed an absolute bomb of a left hand against him that knocked him out clean. So this is a guy who's got incredible experience inside the cage, and ability to really fight with the best of them. I think in that Kopylov fight, he did get hit with a body kick and then ground and pounded and lost, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe that's an avenue of attack that Medic is going to take. But let me move on to Medic, because this is a guy who I saw him fight against Tim Means. And in that Tim Means fight, Tim Means being a legend, maybe you're not on, in his prime. I think, Medic is 9-2, kind of relatively new in his MMA career in terms of record, only 11 fights so far. But the ability that Medic showed on the X up the clinch, the elbows in the clinch, he's never seen the end of a fight, never seen the judges' scorecards. All of his fights are finishes, whether he wins or loses. But in that fight, if you watch that finish, the Medic slip back uppercut as Tim Means is entering the pocket is something to behold. Very, very beautiful shot there. So I think Medic has shown me enough in that Tim Means fight and other fights that I've seen some highlights and clips that he has the striking edge. Now, obviously, I said All-American wrestler for Soriano. So if I'm Soriano, I have power in my hands. I'm able to kind of stall on the feet in terms of being safe enough. But get to the ground game, get to the wrestling, test Medic's wrestling, test that submissions, because he's lost a couple times by submission, I believe. So test that. Test his ground game, get to the grappling, and don't stand up with this guy, because his timing, his eyes, his ability to slip back, throw the clean uppercut, knock you out in one shot is there. It exists. So I'm going to take Medic in this fight. I think he can win by knockout, but I wouldn't be surprised if Soriano's game plan is to come out and get to the grappling. But I want to take Medic. So to recount my picks, although it's been a kind of a choppy episode, to be honest with you, because there's been so many fights to research for, I'm going to take Mackenzie Dern in the main event. In the co-main event, I'm going to take Carson Harris, I believe. I'm then going to take Cesar Almeida. I'm going to take, I didn't pick Kopylov or Chris Curtis. I'm going to stay not picking that one. I'm going to take, who's C-Rod? Oh yeah, I'm going to take Bashi, Austin Bashi against C-Rod. And then I'm taking Medic against Soriano. So that's my picks for this week, guys. I'm so excited that the UFC is back. And I hope you guys can all kind of listen to this podcast. Just listen through it. You don't have to agree with me on every single thing. I think it's a great thing that we can all disagree on how these fights are going to go. And it's MMA. That's what makes it perfect, right? You can never predict exactly what's going to happen. But I try to analyze these fights in a way that was fair to both of these people in each fight. I think these are very close, very well done by the matchmakers in the UFC this time. And as I said, I want these guys to be able to fight in front of crowds. These fighters deserve it. The amount of hours they put in, the sacrifices they make. We're talking with these fighters. They work so hard, and they don't get exposure that they deserve. So it'd be great for these guys to get out of the apex, get in front of a crowd, especially big stars like Mackenzie Dern or amazing strikers like Cesar Almeida or, longtime veterans like Ponzinibbio and Chris Curtis. They deserve to be in front of the people, not just fighting in a glorified tent. You know what I mean? And I don't want to be disrespectful to the UFC. I know they put a great production on at the apex and, there's a small crowd that comes, and sometimes it's kind of cool to see that close environment, to hear the shots more on the broadcast. But for me, get these fighters back in front of the people, get these guys fighting in front of the big crowds like you did at Macau, like you did in, I think it was Vancouver, like you did at Tampa. That's what we need. UFC. I'm campaigning for the fighters here, but that's been the predictions. And I just want to get into a small discussion very, very quickly. We spoke a little bit about it with Bobby Winther. I was going to go for a different topic, but I'm going to select this one. I had two in mind. Bobby Winther spoke about in the most recent episode 14, please go watch that, about changing MMA a little bit, changing the way we develop professionals in this sport. And I think it was a really good idea. He said that we need to have academies like football teams do in Europe, more of a institutional system that actually, finds grapplers and young kids who are very good and very talented and raises them through a system that puts them on a track towards being in the UFC professional fighters. Like Bobby Winther said, we'll pay for the gear, we'll pay for your education in this sport, we'll pay for your maybe housing or your residence, and your gear and all of this stuff in your classes, so that there's actually a streamlined system that can actually develop mixed martial artists. Because right now, fighters are having to find it their own way. They're having to find teams on their own. They're having to start training on their own. They're having to pay for everything themselves. They're having to work a second job all the way up until sometimes being a champion. You think about Alexandre Pantoja, one of the greatest fighters I've ever seen in my life, one of the best flyweights we've ever seen, probably only second to Demetrius Johnson in that respect. Oopsie. Probably second to only Demetrius Johnson in that respect, right? This is a guy who was working for Uber Eats delivery services one fight before becoming champion, right? So we need to figure out a way where these fighters can make more money on the way up, or they don't need a second job because they don't need expenses in terms of their training. And I think that would be a great way to grow the sport. I'm sure the UFC is interested in that. They have the UFC gyms already. They have the UFC PIs. Why not start an academy system that can actually streamline people into things like the Dana White Contender Series, into things like the the Ultimate Fighter and things like that, or what's the other one? Dana White's looking for a fight. I don't know, but there has to be more of an academy system. I agree with Bobby the Ghost Winther there. And I implore people to go watch that, because as a pro fighter, he has a bit more insight than I do. And his story is truly amazing. But I think it would be just help grow the sport. And you see now the new style of mixed martial artists that are coming through the ranks. Raul Rosas Jr., who we spoke about against C-Rod, is one of those people who's probably not got a base in it specifically anything. And he's a great jiu-jitsu player, great jiu-jitsu roller. But, we're seeing the new age. We're seeing mixed martial artists grow up as a mixed martial artist, not necessarily a boxer or a kickboxer that transition into the sport. So it's the time. The sport is maturing faster and faster, and we're getting to a point now where it needs to be a bit more of a healthier place, not only for the fans and all the dialogue and the media that I talk about, but for the fighters themselves to be able to develop in a professional sense. But let me know what you guys think. I just wanted to add that on there at the end because it's been playing on my mind, and I'm sure we can talk about it more with people like Bobby Winther. I'm hoping to have some really big fighters who maybe have been mentioned in this episode on the podcast. These are the things that I want to talk about. These are the things that matter to me. And yeah, but UFC back this weekend. So excited about it. Might do a live stream to it. Might do like a live stream watch along. So let me know if you guys want to see that as well. I just want to say thank you for all the support on the most recent content. Obviously, with all the short form stuff that I'm putting out, it's done pretty well on the TikTok, the Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. So please keep doing that and come watch the full episodes. I really care about what you guys think about this stuff, and I want to create dialogue and discussion in the comments. So let me know what you guys think about the predictions. Let me know what you guys think about, professional MMA academies. And you know what? Subscribe. Definitely do that. We need that. But yeah, I'm just happy that you're watching this and joining the family and helping grow MMA healthier than ever before. I just want to connect you guys with the fighters and all of us together, because that's the entire sport. It's not just, Twitter and all that stuff. We can be better than that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching episode 15 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. I've been your host, Charlie Binns. Subscribe, follow me on all platforms at the Backseat Fighter Pod, and I will see you on Monday for episode 16 of the Backseat Fighter Podcast. See you later.